Welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we will be discussing Book 6, the first half of it. We are over halfway in the Republic now, and what we can see, or what I think we should see kind of carefully, is what we've been doing in the Republic, what Plato's been setting up, is a type of ascent. You begin. Remember, the whole Republic begins with Socrates' recollection of the fact that he went down to the Piraeus. So you sort of start with something like chaos, and then you get this ascent through this attempt to order the many into a one. And so I believe the central books of the Republic can be seen as the ascent of that, ultimately culminating in something like a vision of the one, of unity, perfect unity. This is what perfect unity, I don't want to say would be like, but this is what perfect unity allegorically would be, what it would generate, and then the rest of the Republic, the second half of the Republic, is going to then be not a re-ascent, but a re-descent to descend back to the many, the multitude, the deviations of the one, to find how you get false unities, how unity comes about in a false way, so that it looks like it's a one, but it's not, which plays itself out in very concrete ways. When you think about, there's plenty instances of like false unity when it comes to friendship. It seems like these two people might be friends, but it's only on the surface. Deep down, there's actually no unity that's shared, and so it's not really a friendship. You could even ask the question about whether or not certain political arrangements are legitimate, actual communities, right? So is it such that this political constitution really does constitute a thing, something, or is it merely just like chaos of people trying to get by being unjust, right? And so that's I think the question that Plato is proposing in the second half of the Republic is a look at all these different versions of politics to see if they are actually striving for justice, that is, striving for unity, or are they actually striving for disunity? And before we get to that, though, I don't want to jump the gun. Book 6 is an extension of this conversation that we had at the end of Book 5 on the character, the nature of the philosopher. And what we find in Book 6 is the philosopher is difficult to articulate. That is, it's difficult to articulate exactly what a philosopher is, what makes someone a philosopher. We talked about it last time as a lover of truth, or a lover of wisdom, kind of ultimately culminating in this lover of the whole. And so it's the one who can look at the parts and not disregard the parts, not think the parts are unimportant, for the sake of the whole, but rather they're interested in the parts because they are caught up in, or they culminate in this bigger vision, this broader vision of the whole. So the example last time was with beauty. The philosopher loves all the particular instances of beauty only because they lead the philosopher on to beauty itself. And what we find at the very beginning of Book 6 is something like a paradox about the philosopher, and I think in some ways the inability to explain to someone really what's the value of philosophy. So I'm going to try to do my best to unpack this. And I think we need to compare the philosopher with what the dialogue refers to as imitators of philosophy. That is, people who aren't actual philosophers, but they seem to be philosophical on the surface. On, let's see, 491a, Socrates refers to this as, he says, next, look at those who imitate this nature and adopt its pursuit. So there's a type of imitation of the philosophical nature that might, putting it one way, go through all the motions of philosophy, but it's completely perverted or redirected or deviates from the goal of philosophy, the end of philosophy, and so it actually corrupts it, and so it's not real philosophy. An analogy or an example of I think what this is something like, once again, going back to the notion of friendship. And the reason I'm using friendship is because the philosopher is a type of lover, right? Lover of truth. And so they want to unite themselves with what they love, namely with truth. And wisdom perhaps can be thought of as the unity that's brought about between the philosopher and truth. So you're wise when you are in that relationship with truth, such that there's like a oneness that you share with that. And friendship is something similar, but instead of loving truth, it's loving another human being. And friendship can be described as the unity that is had between the two friends, the two individuals. Now, there can be, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, there can be false friendships or imitations of friendship. And one of the causes of that, one of the causes of false friendship could be when one person uses friendship as a means to something else, so that it actually serves something higher in their mind. So if they're looking to get a promotion, right? So if one person's looking to get a promotion in a job or something, they might try to befriend this other individual, because this individual's buddy with the boss, and so if they can become friends with them, they might be able to have an end and kind of climb the ladder, and so the surface would look like they're friends, but by the very fact that it serves a different purpose, it serves a different goal, it's not a real friendship, it's a pseudo friendship, because it's only a pseudo unity. That individual isn't really trying to be united with this other individual. They really want to be united with a promotion. So they're just sort of seeking out this person, not to remain with them, to be friends with them or to be united to them, but to actually move past them and to be united with a promotion, right? So that type of thing, I think, is what Socrates is trying to describe with the philosopher, which, once again, we're going to be kind of going back and forth between the individual and the communal or the social or the societal. And so there can be false philosophers, imitations, people that seem like they have their life together, seem like they have an orderly life, seem like they know, and maybe say all the right answers, do all the right things, but actually not be orderly. They're not actually just. Likewise, there can be societies, communities that seem to be orderly. They have all the right policies, perhaps, but they're not actual communities. And one of the reasons that this is the case, as we'll talk about later on in the Republic, is the fact that the order, the structure, is coming from the outside. So it's something like, here's a policy, have fun with your friends every Saturday, or have fun with your neighbors every Saturday. And you kind of feel like, if you're in this neighborhood and this is a policy of the neighborhood, you kind of feel like, darn it, now's the time I have to make community and be friends. Okay, so I guess I'll do it. That's not going to give rise to friendship unless something miraculous happens, which is like the people in the neighborhood kind of forget about the law and actually internalize it, so that they're not acting because of this external law, but they're acting out of a pure, innate interest in the other individual. It's not an interest in this external law that they're trying to abide by, but rather it's interest in this other individual. And so the external law actually can thwart or get in the way of a bunch of people's attempts to be just. And so this is kind of the great, paradox or conundrum. How do you unify the many into a one? And it can't be by force. And you get that here described in the book 6 of the Republic, when you have the image. Remember the image of the sailor, the captain of the ship, who is sort of hard of hearing and sort of not really running the ship as ought to be, and the many sailors all saying, no, I can run the ship better than you, and so all the sailors are trying to take over the role of captain, right? And the thing to notice about this analogy is that each of these many different sailors are trying to control the direction of the ship. They're trying to order their ship, but none of them knows really how to sail. And that's, I think, what the image that's being used here by Plato. It's all these people think they can do better than the captain, but none of them actually knows how to sail. And the paradox is that if you did actually have a good captain who really did know how to sail, it would sort of be not in the order, or not in its nature, not in his nature, to go around knocking on all the doors of the sailors saying, please let me navigate your ship. I'm really good at this. Please let me navigate the ship. Rather, it should be the other way around. It should be the case that the sailors are all knocking on the door of the captain saying, we're looking for a good sailor. We need someone to guide us. We need someone to lead us. Please, will you sail the ship for us? And so the puzzling situation that we find ourselves in, and this isn't just in the contemporary world, but it's sort of always the case. This might just be innate in fallen human nature, is that we aren't knocking at the door of those that are actually good sailors, good captains. There's a lot of images that can be, played with regarding the notion of a good shepherd and the relation to the sheep, and the sheep thinking that they can tend their own flock, tend their own life, and so I think what you have is that the challenge, the actual challenge that we find ourselves in is, how is it that a polis, a state, will become just? Well, it's got to be when the philosopher becomes the ruler or the guardian of it, because it's the philosopher that has received and knows what justice is, right? Which is ultimately a result of their having this love of the truth, which is this love which goes beyond any particular exemplification of justice towards the universal. But in order for that ruler to rule, the many have to want that ruler to rule. But the many are such that they want to do their own will. They want to make themselves happy, and so they're not willing to let go of their own power. So there's a type of power, it seems, that the many have. There's a force, right? Going back to the very beginning of the Republic, once again, we had talked about the different forms of rule, and there was the force, right? And so remember, Socrates wants to leave, but he's stuck because he's outnumbered. And so the many, there's a type of force because they outnumber the philosopher. They outnumber those that have a claim to knowledge of how to order things, how to rule things. And so the conundrum is the many need to relinquish that force, that power, but they haven't any good reason from their lights to do so, because it looks like they're kind of wedded to their own disorder. And so the only reason that they would ever be slightly interested in philosophy is if it could serve themselves. And so there's a type of something like an egoism, or one of the ways it's described in this part of the dialogue is it's a pride. It's kind of a self-centered pride. So the only way that, or the only possible space for philosophy within most actual societies is if it gives a type of power or strength to the one that studies it. And now you find this even today, like when people say, why should I study philosophy or study the liberal arts? And someone will say, oh, it'll give you a leg up and you can get a better job and you'll be more, marketable. That's completely opposite to what Socrates thinks. That would be to take philosophy and to make it serve not the truth, but your own advantage, right? Your own desire to have your own fulfillment. And so that type of rationale, which is a very common rationale, even at a lot of good liberal arts programs, it's a rationale which is at heart it's sophistical, or it's a type of like a sophistical root. It has a root in sophistry, because it's trying to say this is going to be the best thing that's going to be able to give you a little more oomph, a little more force, a little more control, and the thing about philosophy is it requires a type of humility. It requires a type of powerlessness. You have to kind of recognize that you're not in control. In order to seek truth, you have to realize that you're not in control. Rather, the truth is in control. And so you have to submit yourself to something greater. And so this is what's fascinating about the philosopher, is that they rule, or if they rule by knowing that they've submitted themselves to what is actually good, what is actually just, what is actually true, not what they think is just, what they think is good, what they think is true. And so there's a radical humility that lies at the root of philosophy, which is a type of weakness or powerlessness in a way, and that is completely foreign to most people. Like, why would I study this? Why would I pick up this practice, engage in this type of life, if it's just going to make me weak, if it's going to make me have to submit to something? That is what the Greeks would have referred to as a type of corruption. If you're corrupting yourself by sort of making yourself like that. So I think the Republic right here at the very middle is trying to give you some insight into this really radical picture of what it means to philosophize, but also what it means to rule. It's to know that it's to come to this understanding that you rule by submitting yourself to what is actually the case, what is actually good, what is actually true, and then being ordered by that, and therefore your life becomes aligned with that, becomes ordered to that, and so you kind of become freed from your own ignorances, you become freed from your own weakness in a different sense. And so the fact that you can relinquish or let go of your own will and align it with what's real, that's going to put it's going to diminish the hold that you have on what's actually false or what's actually corrupting for you. And so then this weakness becomes a type of strength in a different way, and what was strength then becomes a type of weakness, or what was strength is weakened. Is probably a better way to put it. And so the at the heart of philosophy, then we can say, is a type of humility, and therefore a type of uselessness. In one sense, it's useless, and this is why the majority on page 187. This is 494a. The majority, as Socrates says, it'll be impossible for them to become philosophical because of the very fact that they just can't really even comprehend why one would do that or seek that out. It's almost like the person who's become so cynical or so jaded by the fact that people want just to network and climb the ladder, that they think every thank you note, every birthday gift, every little gesture is an attempt to prove how wonderful of a person you are. So here's an example. This is what I mean. You really want to try to show someone that that you love them, that you care for them, that you really do want what's best for them. But everything you do for that person, they might just interpret it as, oh, look at that goody two-shoe just trying to be so excellent. There's just the Bible thumper that's trying to do all the right things. They don't actually care about me. They just want to prove to themselves how awesome they are, how holy they are. Now, how do you convince that person that that's not actually what's going on? I think Plato's point is you can't. There's no way that you can convince them. The problem isn't in what you're doing. The problem is in the character that the other person has and how that affects how they interpret every action that you do, right? So that, I think, is why it's going to be almost impossible for the majority to become philosophical for Plato, is because of the very fact that they have a character which just initially just is dismissive of this type of life, which is a type of love which is rooted in humility, a sort of a desire to submit to something greater. So I think you can contrast like fundamentally two different types of lives. You have the life of philosophy, which is the life of humility, and you have the life of the sophist, which is the life of pride. The one thinks that you seek knowledge for the sake of being able to submit. The other, the sophist, seeks knowledge for the sake of being able to make other people submit. And they might be interested in the same questions. They might be asking the same questions, doing the same type of thing, taking the same classes, if you want to put it in sort of a modern form. But the end, the purpose is radically different. And I think that's why Socrates is very cautious of these imitators of philosophy as the worst corrupters of unity, is because they're the ones that might actually have the strength to become rulers, because they have this desire for power, and so they can become rulers, but they would make the worst rulers because of the fact that they only have imitations of virtue and not actual virtue. So here's what I mean. This is the example that's used in this part of the dialogue. This is on 191, 497b. I'll just read some of this, then I'll comment on it. But that is exactly my complaint, Socrates says. There is not one city today with a constitution worthy of the philosophic nature. That is precisely why it is perverted and altered. It is like foreign seed sown in alien ground. It tends to be overpowered and faded away into the native species. So the philosophic nature is like a foreign seed. He actually, at the end of that passage, he describes it as something that's like divine, but it gets overpowered and overwhelmed by human endeavor. And for the sophist, it actually gets even a little bit worse, because what they do is they take the image of the divine and they kind of use it for human endeavor. So rather than taking philosophy as an attempt to bring humans to something divine, it ultimately is the case that for the sophist, philosophy is used to make everything human. Ultimately, the within the control, within the power of the ruler, and the effects of that, I think, are I think you can feel that throughout your life in the ways that you reflect on political rule, and I mean that both sort of globally at the state level, the national level, but I think even more in regards to your own individual life, right? Because even what's going on here is this isn't just about politics of the state, but it's about sort of the politics of the soul. And I think you can realize that you've been in situations where you have false motives for acting, for seeking answers to questions, or even for asking questions, and it's how should I put this? the downfall, the character flaw is not so much like in what you do, but it's in the origin or the motive that underlies that action. And so you could think of your actions as just a manifestation of that character. But when you are so good at like deceiving yourself, you kind of lose sight of the fact that you have deceived yourself, right? So you might actually come to think initially, or maybe not initially, in the long run, you might come to think that you are a better person than you actually are. And that's because you just say, oh, I do all these good actions, so I'm actually a good person. And you've lost sight of what that underlying character is that gave rise to those actions in the first place. Here's an example that might sort of hit home with some people. So like you find yourself, doing certain actions just because you want to look cool. Like, I don't know, within certain contexts that could be, helping people at the soup kitchen, or maybe that means like going to church, going to mass or something. And it turns out that you eventually start forming all these habits of action that are rooted in very selfish, egotistical origins, right? So the origin of your charitable acts is ultimately a type of selfish egoism. Why do you do these charitable acts, like go to spend your Saturdays at the soup kitchen? It's because you want to feel good about yourself. You want to look good in the eyes of your peers and what have you. Or even it even could turn out that this is just something to propose and for you to think about. It could be that, the reason I do all these good actions is because I want something good in return for this, and I think I'll get it. So charitable actions become self-serving in that I think I'm going to get something good out of this. And then you should ask, but is that then undermining the act as a charitable act, if the real reason that you did it is because it serves you? Okay, so, but at the very least, let's press on. So the point is, when you have formed all these habits of action over a long period of time, it's easy to lose track of or lose sight of what the real root of those actions is. And so you don't quite know whether those actions are genuinely charitable or whether they're only imitations of charity. And it takes a real sort of reflective endeavor, examination of conscience endeavor, to not lie to yourself and to be willing to say, I could be wrong about what my real motives are here. And that's a difficult thing. It takes a type of humility to do that, because it would require that you would be open to coming to the realization that you're not a good person. And very few people want to come to that realization. And so they often just don't ask that question. They don't want to engage in that examination of what are the real roots of these apparently charitable actions, because they don't want to even think about them as potentially merely imitations of charity. Okay, and so they'll just completely resist that, and the idea of becoming philosophical in nature, which would be a type of reflection on what are the real roots, the reality of this endeavor, is not something that they would even take up. And that, I think, is what's happening with the sophist, or at the very least, the masses don't don't even want to think that way. Okay, actually, at one point, I'll mention this, and then we'll bring this to a close. But at one point in another dialogue, this is in the Gorgias, Socrates is speaking with a sophist, and he's trying to distinguish philosophy from sophistry, whereas sophistry is just about trying to make things seem pleasing and good so as to convince people, regardless of whether it's true. You're just trying to convince them. You could think of like coming up with advertisements, TV advertisements or what have you, that convince people to buy a certain type of deodorant just because of the fact that you've used awesome music and you've used some humor, and you watch any deodorant ad and you'll see what I mean. It's trying to entice the emotions and the passions, and just getting you to act towards buying this deodorant with no real understanding of the content about, is this a good deodorant or not? It's just, this isn't a funny advertisement, and so you feel attracted towards that product. So that's something like what sophistry is it's the ability to persuade people by like circumventing understanding or reason. And Socrates says, no, understanding, it has to be aimed at truth. It has to be aimed at reason. It has to follow the path of reason if it's really going to be understanding, or if it's really going to be knowledge. And this sophist he's speaking with says, "Oh, you're just coming up with your own sophistry to try to convince me, to persuade me that I'm wrong." And this is a very common thing that happens. The way that, I mean, it's a subtle point, but the idea is that for someone who is a sophist, the only way that they can interpret philosophy is as a type of sophistry. It's a type of endeavor to persuade people, and it just so happens that the way the philosopher tries to persuade people, that is through the eyes of the sophist, is as using arguments and reason and all this stuff, and you feel like you're getting backed into a corner, so then you feel like you're being forced. Then this is actually how Book 6 begins. He talks about how talking with Socrates, people will get this feeling that they don't know how to answer him because they're not real good at having philosophical conversations. And every time Socrates asks a question, they answer it, they kind of feel like they're getting backed into this corner. And so they think like Socrates is just doing this sophistry thing. But that's not, I think, really what philosophy is. But from the standpoint of the sophist, that's almost the only way that they can interpret it. And so the great challenge is, how do you communicate to someone who's not philosophical what it means to be philosophical? That's a great challenge. It's almost like, how do you communicate to someone who is deaf what the glories of listening to music are? How do you communicate to someone who is ignorant of music, like ignorant of like playing a musical instrument? How do you communicate to them? How do you try to convey to them just the pleasures, the enjoyment of playing a musical instrument? There's someone who just can't comprehend what's so great about playing an instrument. Now, most people, I think, probably have some vague impression, but they're always going to view it from the outside, right? The enjoyment of like playing a guitar or playing a piano, for someone who doesn't do it, is always just going to be this external thing. You almost have to take other people's word in order to say that that's enjoyable, because you've never experienced it. You don't know what that enjoyment actually is like. And that's similar to the enjoyment or the value of philosophy. It has an intrinsic value that must be known intrinsically, which means you have to have a philosophical spirit in order to come to understand the value of philosophy. But for the sophist, who doesn't have a philosophical spirit, they're always going to be cut off from that. And so it's a great paradox, a great conundrum that almost leads to a type of pessimism, I guess, about whether or not this can actually be done, namely whether or not you can actually convey to someone the value of philosophy and the need to have a philosophical ruler when that person is not themselves philosophical. Really a puzzling thing. But as we'll see next time, there is hope because this sort of thing does happen. Just think about the person who doesn't understand the value of learning a musical instrument. Eventually, somehow, they just trust, okay, I guess I should just practice and keep practicing. And this isn't fun. Why do people say playing a musical instrument is fun? I'm just sitting in my room practicing Twinkle Twinkle. This is not fun. And then eventually, at a certain point, the light begins to shine on them and they realize, no, wait, I think there is something kind of fun to this. There is something enjoyable to this. There's a depth to this that I didn't see initially. And now I see it, but only because I went through this discipline, which was like a darkness that I just thought this is stupid. And now the light is shining and I now finally get it. I get why this matters. I get why this is significant. And that sort of, I didn't quite plan to end like that, but that image of the light shining is what we're going to move to in the next podcast, with the notion of the sun as shining light and revealing what it is to know, what it is to be philosophical.